So, you want to brew, but you don't know where to start. Or maybe you do brew, and you have a few ideas for some funky experiments, and you don't want to spend the time and effort into brewing something that you might not like. I'm Phil. This is Phil with Facts, and today we are going over some basic brews. So let me explain this a little bit. So what I'm going to do today is show you guys how to make some basic brews. Nothing really extra, nothing out of the ordinary. Very simple entry-level brews. This is going to show you some basics, some really cool techniques, also some inexpensive ways to start a hobby you're not really sure you're ready to get into yet. At the end of it, you're going to end up with 3 baseline recipes for a wine and mead that we can then put into some mason jars and then experiment with different things like higher acidity levels, higher sweetness levels, spices, things of that nature. And then we're going to do a controlled test where we're going to try the dried fermented product versus the adjuncted versions of each one. This is going to be an easy and fun way to find out what your palate preferences are. Wine is a very nuanced beverage. Making it should be something you do towards your own personal palate and preferences. If you're not going to like the product you make, you're not going to want to keep making it. Let's go over why you might hesitate to start brewing. There's a few things that you have to consider. 1, there's a cost to it. Brewing can get expensive over time the more you do it. It also gets cheaper the more you do it because you will build up your supplies along the way, and at some point you'll just have a plethora of stuff laying around. The other is your personal palate and creating recipes you might like. You might not like something, or you might not know if you like something, and if that's the case, you don't want to take the time and effort to brew a large batch of something that you're never going to drink. As far as gear goes, today we're going to do it very minimalist. This is something you can just go to the grocery store, more or less, and start brewing that same day. So you're not going to need a fermenter for this video. I know, shocking, right? You're not going to need a fermenter, but Phil, how are we going to brew if we don't have a fermenter? We have a fermenter. These bottles are not good for long-term brewing. If you're making larger batches, or if you're making very particular recipes that might age for a long time, you don't want to use the plastic bottle the juice comes in. However, if you are just starting out, and this is going to be the first thing you ever brew, and you just want to know what white grape juice might taste like after you put it through a fermentation, this is going to be fine for today's experiment. You will need some tools, or at least I recommend you get some tools. They're relatively inexpensive, easy to get, and if you have access to Amazon, you can get them in a couple of days. What I'm talking about is an airlock. There are several different types, and you can get them in individuals, 2-packs, 4-packs, etc. A stopper, a rubber stopper, that will go into the bottle and hold the airlock in place. A food grade safe sanitizer, such as Star San. A funnel. And then I'm going to recommend a hydrometer, although for this exact experiment, it's not as critical. However, if it doesn't ferment all the way, or if you want to know how much alcohol you actually are going to have at the end, you won't know without it. All that equipment together is probably only going to cost you a few dollars. It's going to come to your house relatively quickly, and it's not the biggest waste if you end up deciding this is not the hobby for you. However, it's a good starter packet if you decide it is the hobby for you. So at this point, let's start going over the recipes. I will say, anything that's going to touch the inside of this bottle has been sanitized. Please sanitize all of your equipment. This is one of those things you really can't skip on. Is it going to ruin your entire brew 100% if you don't sanitize everything? Maybe not. However, you want to control everything that gets in here, up to the microscopic parts like the yeast. You don't want anything in here that might alter flavors or change what you're creating. It might not give you the intended result. It might it might hurt the experiment, it might hurt your perception of brewing, and we don't want that. So first thing we're going to do, I also want to say at this part, I'm going to do the wine recipes first and then the mead. I'll try to put some timestamps at the bottom of the video if you just want to skip to the one you're more interested in. However, once I put honey into this funnel, I'm not going to have a good time putting anything else through that funnel. And I only have one at the moment, so that's why I'm doing it this way. However, we're going to start by pouring off some of the juice. I'm doing that because I need to get some sugar into here. And I'm going to need to actually pour up a little bit more, so I might need more mason jars or a bigger vessel. Alright, so my first recipe is going to be for a basic white wine. Now I'm intending for this to go dry, and then we will sweeten it as one of our categories in secondary. I'm going to put roughly 2 pounds of sugar into this vessel. So I put 2 pounds of sugar into my juice. I'm now just going to shake it up and get that sugar mixed up. Now 2 pounds sounds like a lot. You probably don't want to drink it at this point. It's going to be sickeningly sweet. The amount of sugar you put in is going to directly affect how much alcohol comes out at the end. The yeast will eat the sugar, convert it into alcohol. That's the basic principles. Now that it's all mixed up, I just want to take a quick reading with my hydrometer. And just make sure I added enough sugar to it. My gravity is going to start at a 1.100. The gravity isn't going to change all that much by the extra stuff I'm putting in here. Next thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of black tea. And spill it all over the place. Now the black tea isn't so critical. However, now this is just black tea. It's a couple tea bags steeped in a little bit of hot water for a lot longer than you normally steep the tea bag in the water. This is going to bring some tannins to the party, that mouthfeel. You know when you drink a glass of wine and you swirl it and you see the lines on the side of the glass? That mouthfeel, that thickness to the liquid. The juice itself fermenting is probably not going to give you any of that, and you really want a little bit of mouthfeel when you're drinking your wine. You don't want it to taste like water straight going down. The other thing I'm going to add is a little bit of orange peel. The orange peel is going to give it a little bit of acidity. Now, when you're making any wine, mead, or homebrew in general, there is a balance of flavors you want. And part of that is always going to be acidity and tannins, as well as bittering notes and other adjuncts you might want to add. But again, that's very nuanced and is going to end up changing with your personal palate preferences. This is going to come out to a very nice white wine that is simple and basic, probably drinkable after a few weeks, and a very good baseline to add other things to kind of experiment and figure out what do you like or what do you not like about a basic white wine. I should also add at this point, you can do this with any fruit juice as long as the ingredient list is the juice of that fruit, water, and maybe a little acid. If there's any other preservatives in here, they might harm the colony. So the quality of the juice really does matter. Use a juice that you actually would want to drink. If you don't like the juice, you're not going to like the wine that juice makes. Let's go. So for yeast selections today, I bought a Red Star triple pack. because it's going to serve all of my needs for brewing today. But also, these are normally discounted, very easy to get packs of yeast, which means if this is your first time ever brewing, you're not buying 10 packets of something that you might never use again. Or maybe it's the wrong yeast for the type of brews you want to make. This is a nice 3-pack. Comes with 3 different yeasts, and it gives you another baseline of, wow, I like the esters I get when I use this yeast in this, opposed to using the same strain of yeast for every brew ever, which if that's all you have access to, please do it. But if you have access to other yeasts, it's fun to play around and see what you might get. Even if you make the same juice with 3 yeasts and see what each one comes out with after a few weeks or a few months, you might learn some things about your personal preferences. And I'm going to keep saying that. It's your personal preferences for brewing. You're brewing for yourself, maybe friends and family, and you want to make something that you're going to enjoy drinking, or you don't mind passing off as a gift. So, yeah, a little bit of thought has to go into it. However, this is still a very fun way to start. So for the white wine, I'm going to use Premier Cuvée, excuse my pronunciation. We're going to put the pack right in, and then we're pretty much done with this particular recipe. It's going to go under airlock, and I'm not going to touch it again for at least 2 weeks. Now the packet could go right in. We're going to shake it up. At this point, it's okay to shake it. Once that yeast starts to activate, I wouldn't go any further. We are going to get our first airlock. Let it drain a little bit if needed. This is going to go right on top. And just like that, you have started a white wine. That's pretty cool. And that took almost no effort. I'm going to get this cleaned up a little bit, and then we'll start the second one. Alright, so now the next one we're going to do is a straight up, well, it's red grape juice, which would make a red wine. Now, I like doing a comparison from store-bought red grape and white grape juice and seeing what they both taste like. It's also going to be vastly different than what you're expecting a red or white wine to taste like, but not completely. Just like before, I'm going to pour off a little bit of the juice. And that's just to make some space for the sugar. Not a big deal. Just like before, I'm going to add the sugar. So now, unlike the first recipe where I used a little bit of black tea, in this recipe I'm going to use an adjunct. I'm going to use some red wine tannin. Now, there's tons of adjuncts you can put in your brew. A lot of them are either to help stabilize it, help fermentation go, or create the flavors you want, such as tannins or acids or numerous others. Now, if you don't want to invest in red wine tannin, you can just use more tea, and that is fine. I wanted to show you a couple different ways to do each one, so you have a few options. Again, basic bones would just be some black tea and some orange peel with the sugar and the juice. And that's going to come out with a decent wine, which is going to be a good control to experiment with. However, I happen to have a lot of red wine tannin, and it gives you a very predictable product each time. Again, look up the ones you want to buy. Your mileage may vary on it. I'm just showing you some different ways. Now I'm going to add another third of orange peel to this one. If I was making a full gallon, I might add a full half orange, maybe a little bit more than that, because a gallon of liquid's going to need it. This is not going to give me a gallon of liquid at the end. Probably nowhere near, which is fine. I don't want a gallon of something I'm not sure about, nor do I want a gallon of something I might not drink. However, this much in a little test run won't be a problem. We are going to shake it again. Now, this also gets a little bit of oxygen into the brew, which is good. The yeast is going to need oxygen at the beginning to start creating alcohol. Once it gets going, you do not want to introduce any more oxygen to this, and that's just a safety thing. Alright, once we're all good and mixed up, just like before, I want to take a quick gravity reading. Now, I had very intentional gravities in mind for these liquids. I do not want to make something, and right on money, 1.100. These should come out between 12 and 14% when they are done fermenting, which is a good amount of alcohol that you could say you made, but it's not too high for the yeast to handle with no other adjuncts, such as nutrients, things like that. And I didn't want to go into that route for this video. This is supposed to be simple. This is a basic recipe. So I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. For this one, I'm going to use the Premier Classique, which is a red wine yeast, which is perfect for this. Now, if you don't want to use a whole packet, you don't have to. Half a packet for something this size is more than enough to get everything going and be fine. I'm using the whole packets because I have quite a lot of it, and in my experience, using the whole packet gives you a much stronger fermentation quicker, which I like for my needs. However, if you want to get 2 or 3 different juices and you only have 1 packet of yeast, you can split it at this volume, and all 3, in theory, should start fermenting. It might take a couple extra hours before you see any activity, but that's okay. For this one, I'm going to use an S-style airlock. There's no real difference between this one and this one. They're going to essentially do the same job, which is, as the yeast start going, they're going to create gases that are going to want to come up. This airlock is going to allow all those gases to escape while letting nothing back into the brew that you don't want in there. And I mean things like bacteria, fungus, bugs, ants especially love brews and are going to try everything to get inside here. If there's even one in your space, it will find this bottle. Trust me. So you want to make sure nothing can get into the brew that can harm it. You are taking some time out of your day to start this. You are going to consume this. You are going to spend time, energy, and effort into the product. You want to make sure it's as safe as possible. And since you're using these as the fermenter, this is a very minor expense to spend to start homebrewing and see if you like something. I'm going to clean this mess up now, and we're going to get back and we're going to talk about mead. Now, our last recipe for today is a basic mead. Mead is probably the I wouldn't say funny, weirdest ones of the 3, because mead is one that you might not have readily available access to on your normal day-to-day journeys. A lot of liquor and wine stores don't sell it. The ones that do sell ones that are vastly different brand by brand. This is because mead doesn't have the same restrictions that wines do in at least the US. So you could have a mead that's 4% ABV and sparkling, or you could have a bottle of it that's like 19% and has distilled spirits added to it. It's wildly different. So if you do want to try making mead, you can't just, it's not a good idea to just go buy a bunch and try them. You'd have to do research first and see what you like. Making it yourself is a great way to see, do I even like mead? Do I like the taste of fermented honey? That's why this is going to be another bare bones, very basic recipe. And probably my favorite one today, because I personally love mead. I make lots of it. And if you've seen this channel before, you probably have seen, I do all kinds of really fun experiments with it. However, until you know what a basic mead tastes like, you might not want to spend any time and effort in making a funky, weird, out there recipe, because if you don't like basic fermented honey and water, no matter what you add to it, it's probably not going to make it better for you. All right, so funnel goes back in. Now today we're making a mead with 2 pounds of honey. And that's more or less because that's going to give us around the same gravity as the juices are going to be. But also, this jar of honey has 2 pounds in it. There's no need to do any extra weighing or anything of that nature. So it's easy. But honey does pour slowly. Yeah, this is going to take a little while. Alright, and while the honey is in, I'm going to use a little bit more of the water, and I'm just going to shake up this jar and try to get all the honey out of there. Honey is expensive. I don't want to waste any of it, and I really want 2 pounds of honey in here. We're also going to add black tea again, about, I don't know, I had to guess, I'd say 4 ounces or so. And you can sub this for powdered wine tannin if that's what you have. Now nothing is mixed up yet. You can clearly see there's a line where the honey is, and then you can see the water. The water is a little colored now because of the honey and because of the tea, but you still have to do a much better job of actually mixing. Before I go and do that, I'm going to add the rest of this orange peel. And in case you're wondering what I'm going to do with the rest of the orange, it's going to be lunch. Now, let's give this a really hefty stir. And you want to shake until there's no more honey clinging to the sides or bottom of the inside of this jug. There's a little honey on the outside of it. I'll clean that out a little later on. Just spilling. It happens. Now, this one is going to get Premier Blanc, which is the less of the Red Star Trio from this yeast varietal. Just like the other two, I'm going to pour it right on top. Give it one more shake. And yes, I should have taken a gravity reading before I put the yeast in. However, the yeast aren't going to activate that quickly, so I'm not too worried about it. And for this one, we have a 1.080. So it's a little bit lower than the two wines, but I'm okay with that. Now, just like the other two, I'm going to put an airlock and a stopper on top. Put that to the side. And then I'm going to clean up a little bit. So there we go. We got 3 basic recipes for wine and mead that were literally made in minutes with mostly grocery store bought ingredients, with a few pieces of equipment I think are well worth the investment if this is something you want to try out. What's going to happen next? Well, I'm going to let these ferment for about 2 weeks, which means you'll probably see the follow-up video to this in about 2 weeks. At which point, when the yeast have done all the work they're going to do, eaten all the sugar they can and created wine and alcohol, that kind of thing, we're then going to take each one and siphon it out. Now, quick note, for part 2, you will need to get mason jars and an auto siphon. However, if you don't want to get an auto siphon, if that just seems a little far-fetched right now, you can get by with just some siphoning tube or something like that. I mean, for something this size, you could theoretically pour it even, but I really don't recommend that. That could oxygenate the brew and create off flavors, which again might obscure your view on what you made. I recommend an auto siphon. I think it's just a good thing to have for the second part of this. But you do what your heart tells you is right. We're then going to transfer, siphon, the liquid from each one of these into mason jars, keeping one as a control. That's going to be nothing added to it, just the liquid how it is. So the fully fermented beverage. Then we're going to add some to another mason jar, and this one we're going to sweeten. Probably over sweeten, just so you have an idea of what it tastes like when there's sugar in it. Then, in this one, we might play around a little bit. I might oak one. I might add some spices to one, like a cinnamon stick or some clove. Things of that nature. We might add some fruit, outside fruits that are not grapes, such as blueberries, cherries, other dark fruits or berries like that. And it's going to give us a nice little sample of everything we can do with one brew. And through this, you might discover, wow, spiced red wine is delicious, and I would love to make a gallon of this. I would love to make 5 gallons of this, and really play around with those spices and all the varietals. And that would give you a baseline to know, I need this equipment, such as better fermenters, or buckets to brew in, things of that nature. But we'll get more into that on the next part of this experiment. For now, I just want to thank you for watching the video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, please leave them in the comments. I'd be more than happy to answer anything you ask. And I look forward to seeing you guys for part 2. Thanks for watching.